The galaxy burned under the Empire's iron grip. Worlds that had once thrived under independent governance now lay in silent submission, their cities flickering with lights that masked despair. Trade routes were choked with Imperial patrols. Communication networks were monitored and dissected. Every star system knew the cost of defiance. It was an empire built on precision, on overwhelming force, and on a cruelty that demanded obedience. Ships of blackened steel, bristling with weapons that dwarfed any human creation, carved paths through the void, their presence a constant reminder that resistance was a synonym for annihilation. Yet in the shadows of these mechanical titans, humanity clung to existence. Colonies scattered across the stars whispered of survival through ingenuity, of survival through audacity. No fleet could match the Empire in size. No arsenal could rival its firepower. Yet humans endured, adapted, and endured again. Their greatest strength lay not in their vessels, not in their numbers, but in a mindset unbound by expectation. Where the Empire relied on rules and structure, humans thrived in chaos and improvisation. Among them stood a general whose name alone caused the Empire to pause, if only for a heartbeat. She moved like a storm contained, calm in the eye yet capable of devastating fury. Her reputation was legendary, daring, unorthodox, and frighteningly effective. Stories of her victories were whispered across outposts, tales of a woman who saw angles invisible to others, who gambled where others hesitated. Her fleet was smaller, less equipped, but every maneuver displayed the principle that intelligence, creativity, and timing could defy brute strength. The Empire commander, arrogant and methodical, dismissed humanity as primitive. He had calculated every possibility, weighed every outcome, and assumed he had accounted for the human element as a minor variable. That was a mistake. Humanity, in its simplest form, did not conform to calculations. It did not act predictably. It innovated, improvised, and exploited assumptions with brutal efficiency. The first engagement had been almost ceremonial in its brutality. A colony on the edge of imperial space had been marked for subjugation, its leaders forced to broadcast loyalty oaths. The Empire fleet arrived with precision, and for hours, the human defenders had scrambled, outgunned, and outmanned. Then she appeared, issuing orders with a calm that belied the chaos. Ships that should have been destroyed maneuvered with uncanny precision. Humans struck at supply lines, targeting fuel depots and command ships with a blend of ingenuity and reckless courage. When the dust settled, the colony was battered but free. The Empire fleet forced to retreat in shock. It was not brute force that won the day, but a single human mind that perceived opportunity where others saw risk. The Empire had underestimated the audacity of a species that saw death as a puzzle, not a verdict. Intelligence officers back on Earth and scattered colonies documented every maneuver, every improvisation, and every successful strike, knowing that the lessons learned were more valuable than any victory. The Empire commander fumed in his command chamber, a web of holographic displays reflecting the frustration that few had witnessed from him. Reports highlighted the unusual efficiency of the human response, the unexpected precision, the audacity of attacks that seemed almost reckless. His advisors urged caution, but arrogance clouded judgment. "They are insignificant," he declared, dismissing the losses with a flick of his clawed hand. No species without discipline could execute such coordinated chaos again. But human unpredictability was not discipline. It was imagination, resourcefulness, and a willingness to embrace the impossible. Meanwhile, the general studied every transmission, every movement of the Empire fleet. She knew they would return, stronger and angrier. She had no illusions about the cost of the coming conflicts, yet she refused to yield to fear. Plans were drawn in precise lines and convoluted patterns, maps overlaid with calculations that no computer could fully understand. Her human crew absorbed orders instantly, executing strategies that relied as much on intuition as on logic. Machines could not replicate creativity, and the Empire had yet to realize that this distinction would define the battles to come. Espionage became the silent front. Small human ships, unremarkable in appearance, slipped past patrols to gather intelligence. Colonists, trained in observation and subterfuge, relayed data that illuminated weaknesses in the Empire's armor. Every intercepted message, every unexplained gap in patrol patterns, was catalogued and exploited. When humans struck, they did so with precision, exploiting vulnerabilities that the Empire had never considered significant. The general understood that psychological warfare was as important as physical confrontation. Propaganda, misinformation, and staged retreats drew the Empire into traps of their own making. Every loss inflicted on the humans was framed to appear as a costly victory for the enemy, eroding confidence and feeding overconfidence. She orchestrated maneuvers that relied on Empire assumptions of superiority, turning arrogance into a weapon. Every Imperial victory brought them closer to disaster. Despite victories, the cost weighed heavily. Human colonies endured bombardments, supply lines were strained, and the shadow of death hovered over every mission. Losses were recorded, but every setback was a lesson, every failure a step toward mastery. Humanity's resilience was evident not in the survival of a single battle but in the adaptation that followed. Where other species would have surrendered to superior firepower, humans recalculated, adjusted, and struck back harder. The Empire underestimated the intangible, the human refusal to submit to inevitability. They did not fight merely to survive. They fought to demonstrate capability, to assert presence, to prove that the underdog could dictate terms on a battlefield where the odds were stacked against them. The general embodied this principle, a figure who moved through the galaxy like a ghost, striking where least expected, vanishing before reprisal could arrive. Every daring maneuver, every strike that defied expectation, carried a lesson that would echo across human settlements for generations. She convened her fleet quietly, not in pomp, but in purpose. Each officer, each pilot, understood the stakes. Every calculation, every potential outcome, was weighed, yet flexibility was paramount. Orders were given in concise terms, actions predicated on human intuition and experience. The Empire, reliant on rigid command chains, would be slow to respond to innovations born in the heat of improvisation. When the Empire's forces returned, they found humans not in panic, not in retreat, but in calculated readiness. Each ship, though outgunned, occupied positions that maximized advantage. Human ingenuity turned natural hazards into weapons. Asteroid belts became shields and trap zones, solar flares timed with attacks disoriented sensors, and enemy formations were lured into deadly currents of unpredictability. What seemed reckless to the Empire was deliberate, precise, and devastatingly effective. The clash was not just of technology, but of philosophy. The Empire relied on might and expectation. Humanity relied on adaptation and audacity. Every battle, every skirmish, served as proof that ingenuity could outmatch hardware, that courage could undermine fear, that unpredictability could topple certainty. And every encounter left the Empire commander increasingly blind to the human factor, convinced that sheer firepower would eventually crush resistance, unaware that his assumptions had already sealed his vulnerability. The preparations for humanity's boldest gamble unfolded in silence, not because fear gripped the soldiers, but because focus sharpened every movement. On the command deck, the general observed streams of tactical data flowing across dimly lit projections. Every number, every transmission, every faint anomaly from Empire space carried significance. She studied them not as static information, but as part of a living system, patterns, behaviors, flaws waiting to be exploited. Where the Empire trusted its overwhelming strength, she trusted possibility. Humans saw opportunity hidden in chaos, and she was the sharpest embodiment of that instinct. The strike teams assembled with quiet efficiency. They were not elite because of superior training or advanced tech. They were elite because humans had learned to operate under conditions that would shatter the resolve of other species. Improvisation was instinct. Adaptation was survival. Their ships were smaller, lighter, less protected, but every pilot understood angles, velocity, and timing in ways that made simulations look rigid. Their minds processed danger not as constraint but as challenge. The general briefed them with minimalist clarity. There was no rousing speech, no dramatic declaration, only the plan, delivered in stripped-down precision. They would strike a key Empire supply base, not to cripple logistics entirely, but to send a message and gather intelligence critical to the next phase of their operation. The Empire believed itself untouchable. Humans intended to show otherwise. The fleet departed under cover of interference storms that scrambled long-range scanners. The Empire relied heavily on sensor predictability, never imagining that a supposedly uninhabitable zone could serve as a launching point. Human ships drifted silently through the static fields, absorbing electrical distortions that would have crippled more advanced systems. Their vessels were hardy, flexible, capable of manual override when needed. Where precision machines would fail, human hands guided them through with intuition and grit. The Empire base drifted in orbit around a barren moon, a monument to imperial efficiency. Lines of docking arms extended from its metallic structure like skeletal limbs, feeding cruisers and dreadnoughts with fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements. It was armored with layers of shielding and automated defenses. Any frontal attack would have been suicide, precisely why humans did not engage from the front. The general's plan unfolded from an angle the Empire would never consider, from within its own blind spots. Their scanners were tuned for organized formations, large fleets, and predictable assault patterns. They were not optimized for small, unpredictable movements. Human ships drifted between debris fields, using thrown-off metal fragments as temporary cover. They advanced in bursts, matching their thrust with the natural drift of space junk. Every movement was choreographed to appear random. When the first human ship fired, it did not aim at the shields or hull plating. Instead, it targeted a coolant regulator the Empire had never fortified because no enemy had ever thought to strike it. The Empire valued structural logic. Humans valued opportunity. The explosion that followed overloaded a section of the station's internal grid, disabling 1/3 of its automated guns. The Empire operators hesitated, unable to understand how such a critical system had been compromised so quickly. Humans did not hesitate. A second wave cut through exposed cooling ducts, melting power conduits and forcing backup systems to activate in chaotic sequence. The base shook violently, alarms echoing through its metallic corridors. Empire soldiers scrambled into position, their orders delivered in rigid, hierarchical bursts that slowed response times. Human ships darted through the gaps like sparks in a storm. Pilots executed maneuvers that made no logical sense to Imperial analysts. Their trajectories shifted unpredictably, following patterns that appeared suicidal but were grounded in instinct refined by generations of adapting to hostile environments. They struck supply depots, forced ammunition chambers to detonate inward, then slipped away before retaliatory fire could lock onto them. The Empire commander received the initial reports with disbelief. The idea that humans, primitive, disorganized, insignificant humans, had managed to inflict significant damage on one of his key logistical hubs was an insult. He reviewed the footage himself, expecting to find a flaw in the station's design or a traitorous act among its personnel. Instead, he found chaos, human chaos, precise in its unpredictability. He dismissed the threat publicly. Privately, irritation gnawed at the edges of his composure. Humans were acting above their station. They were meant to be crushed, not to maneuver like a seasoned adversary. He increased security measures, ordered reinforcements to critical points, and demanded constant updates on human fleet movements. But he misread the situation entirely. Every adjustment he made was reactive, while humans remained proactive. He was playing defense against an opponent who refused to stay on the board. Meanwhile, the general analyzed the battle in real time. Every explosion, every energy surge, every retreat pattern fed into her evolving understanding of the Empire's operational structure. Where others would have seen victory, she saw data, insight into energy distribution, fleet patrol cycles, reinforcement delays, communication lag, and the internal inefficiencies buried under the Empire's facade of perfection. The audacity of the raid had not been the objective. The intelligence gathered was the true prize. Humanity did not just wound the Empire. They learned how it bled, but victory was never clean. Several human ships were lost in the retreat. Some were struck by automated defenses, others by last-second counterfire. The general recorded each loss without outward emotion, her mind already processing how to improve survival odds in future missions. Every sacrifice meant something. Every fallen pilot contributed to a blueprint of how humans could continue to defy a force vastly superior in resources and technology. Information from the raid revealed something deep within the Empire structure, patterns hidden in supply chains, transport schedules, and communication relays. The general's analysts pieced together fragments that, when combined, formed a revelation. The Empire's fleet relied heavily on a central command relay, a massive flagship that doubled as a mobile nerve center. If severed, it would blind Imperial coordination across multiple sectors. The Empire commander himself operated from that ship. This was the opportunity humanity had been waiting for. The strike on the base had not just been an attack. It had been a distraction, a data extraction, and an opening gambit. Now, armed with intelligence the Empire believed impossible for humans to acquire, the general began designing a plan that would alter the balance of the war. It was a plan that required precision, boldness, and a level of audacity that would be remembered for generations. The fleet regathered in the quiet emptiness between stars. Engineers repaired damaged ships, medics tended to the wounded, analysts worked through shifts without rest. The atmosphere was not one of despair or exhaustion but of sharpening anticipation. They understood they were not merely surviving, they were changing the rules of engagement. Humans were not supposed to win battles like these. Yet they did. And each victory pushed the Empire closer to an edge it did not realize it stood upon. As the general reviewed the final streams of gathered intelligence, she uttered the words her crew had come to expect before every impossible undertaking. The phrase was almost ritualistic, embodying the human spirit that had carried them this far and would carry them further still. It was not bravado, it was truth, a challenge to fate, a promise to her people, and a declaration that the impossible would bow. The next move would not simply wound the Empire. It would shake it.